Heimerdinger is a renowned and respected figure in Piltover, a scientist, professor, dean, and once the head of council. Heimerdinger has helped mold the minds of young scholars at the Academy, while having lived for over 3 centuries, hoping to guide and caution them from the potential risks of science and magic. Not much is known about Heimerdinger's early life in Bandle City. At some point, he would venture out from the spirit realm to Runeterra, eventually arriving at the port city of Piltover. Being inspired by seeing a scientist, Heimerdinger would become a genius inventor, contributing in the construction of Piltover. After the first Progress Day, Heimerdinger would continue to improve the lives of the people of the top side of Zaun, which would later be renamed into Piltover. He would be considered one of the Upper City's founders, including one of the founders of the Piltover University, with his statue adorning the entrance to the prestigious school. He would meet and work with numerous bright minds during the following 2 centuries, some of which would become Heimerdinger's closest friends until their passing. At some point, he would become a counselor for the clans, attending to the matters of the state and being one of the only scientists in this position of power for decades. At one point, he worked with a scientist known as Singed, whose more radical experiments Heimerdinger presumably objected to, leading to the latter's departure. Now, Singed, if you guys don't know, he's the one that makes Warwick, or the werewolf guy, which is actually really fucking cool, to put it bluntly. And he also makes, I think it's technically his daughter, I believe, Oriana. She's essentially a robot, I think. I think she's a robot. I don't know, I'll have to read into her lore and Singe's lore, but interesting character to say the least. Hex Gem Incident. When Academy scholar Jace Talos' workshop was caught in an explosion due to a break-in by Zaunite children, Heimerdinger sent his assistant Victor to ensure that anything dangerous in the workshop was safely dealt with. He then visited Jace personally in his cell and asked him about his unsanctioned research. When he found out that the boy was working on harnessing magic through science, Heimerdinger warned him of the dangers and advised him to let go of his dream and to not mention it during his council hearing, advice that Jace ultimately ignored. After Jace's mother spoke to plead her son's case, instead of banishment as Counselor Bulbach first suggested, Heimerdinger instead moved to simply expel him from the academy, which a majority of the council agreed to. Despite the warnings, Jace continued working on his Hextech project, this time with Victor's help and encouragement from Counselor Medarda. In a short amount of time, Jace, with new knowledge supplied by Victor, got the Hextech to function without destructive results. No longer able to deny its potential benefits, Jace's research was encouraged and eventually led to the creation of the Hex Gates that soon made Piltover a central trading port, advancing the city's progress decades ahead. Piltovan Bicentennial. When Jace and Victor tried to pitch their next Hextech plans to Heimerdinger, he was pleased with their new research, but told him that it will only be ready for use years down the line after further studying to ensure its safety. Heimerdinger would later tell Jace about his old friend Stanwick Piddly, Stanwick Piddly, and informed Jace that he would have the honor of giving the opening Progress Day speech. Jace would ultimately heed Heimerdinger's advice and withhold his new Hextech innovations at his Progress Day speech. Before the end of the day, a Zaunite stole one of the Hextech gemstones that was intended to be showcased during the speech event. In fear of the thief potentially weaponizing it, Jace suggested to the council that they shut down all Hextech operations, warning the councilors who have businesses dependent on the Hex Gates. Mel then recommended that Jace be instated as a council member to better serve his goal of safeguarding the Hex Gates, and thus all matters dependent on it. A radical suggestion, since the council has traditionally only held 7 seats. However, Heimerdinger was impressed by Jace's character and also believed that the security of Hextech would best be overseen by a scientist like Jace. Thus, Heimerdinger seconded Mel's motion, and the rest of the council eventually approved the promotion. As time went on, Heimerdinger became oblivious to Jace, acquiring substantial political influence. Heimerdinger later learned that Victor had been diagnosed with a terminal disease and went to visit him. All Heimerdinger could do to comfort him was tell him that he lived a life he could be proud of. Victor and Jace have been researching a device called the Hex Core, which has the potential to augment organic matter. However, their experiments to use the Hex Core to keep plants alive ended in failure, and so they hoped if they showed it to Heimerdinger, he could recognize the similarity. He could provide insight that could make the device workable. When the duo showed Heimerdinger the hex core, he recognized its similarity to the kind of apocalyptic power he'd encountered from the past and feared it. Heimerdinger demanded that. I'm stuttering so badly. Heimerdinger demanded they destroy the hex core, disappointing and frustrating the pair, both of whom were desperate to somehow use it to cure Victor. In spite of Heimerdinger's speech about holding each other accountable and trying to heal the divide between Piltover and Zahn, Jace dismissed his speech as useless platitudes. In truth, Jace found Heimerdinger's continued objection to his and Victor's Hextech research a problem, and thus moved to oust Heimerdinger during their next council meeting. Jace blamed Heimerdinger's inaction for all of the undercity problems Piltover had to contend with, and thus insisted he retire. The other counselors backed him due to the deals Jace had made with them, in addition to Mel's guidance, after which Jace became his replacement as the de facto head. After his eviction from the council, Heimerdinger made his way to Zahn in hopes of offering them assistance, but his endeavors were rebuffed. On his way back, he saw and was impressed by a hoverboard and met its owner, Echo. With the boy's leg injured, Heimerdinger helps Echo travel back to the Firelight's base, where the two began discussing their thoughts on Echo's inventions, particularly his hoverboard. I wonder why it doesn't. It's probably. Wonder when they're gonna bring like the rest of it with his background and all that. With him going to the parallel universe with Echo. Heimerdinger is a scientist with the best intentions and a drive to nurture curiosity, encourage exploration, oversee experimentation, and inspire innovation and imagination. However, he is moralistic and believes no science should ever endanger innocent lives, such that he originally believed magic cannot be scientifically destructive capabilities of magic and those who wielded it. When Jace was discovered to be experimenting on doing just that, Heimerdinger advised the younger scientist to own up to his mistakes and continue his experiments, only for Jace to protest at his hearing. And Heimerdinger regrettably chose to have Jace expelled from the university and have his research destroyed, as the alternative would have been for Jace to be imprisoned or forever exiled from Piltover. When Jace, with the help of Victor, successfully proved Heimerdinger wrong that magic can be artificially created, Heimerdinger remained adamant in his belief that just because one can does not mean one should, only for the Council of Piltover to intervene and sponsor Jace's development of Hextech. In the years following, Heimerdinger changed his mind, to a degree, about Hextech, but while he was impressed by Jace and Victor's work, he advised they spend several more years working it out, determining any potential flaws and working on safeguards, much to their dismay. Heimerdinger's wisdom and slow and steady notions, however, made him unpopular with the other council members, including Jace, as they began to view Heimerdinger as an obstacle who was slowing the pace of progress. This was due to Heimerdinger's centuries-long life and his looking at things in the long run and failing to recognize that the world and those he shares it with do not share in his patience or his intentions. As a result, Heimerdinger was devastated when Jace insisted Heimerdinger be retired from the council as a means to end his interference with their work and their politics. Heimerdinger left Piltover and settled in Zahn, where he saw firsthand the hard, difficult, and often miserable ways of living for the people there. But he found a new place and a new way to help people when he encountered Echo. Interesting. So he did work with Singed at some point, which I remember that, actually learning about that. Uh, who's Stanwick? Heimerdinger was friends with Stanwick Piddly. According to Heimerdinger, Piddly was a teacher and inventor. Everything he built either exploded, melted, or toppled over. Stanwick set his personal ambitions aside and focused on something far more important, Piltover's future. He realized nothing he could accomplish could compare to the contributions of his students. For his sacrifices and contributions, Piltover had Stanwick Piddly memorialized. Alright. Interesting. Heimerdinger has some interesting lore. I feel like they could go more into it if they wanted to. Oh well.